what I'll do now is I'll pass off to Carrie and to Catherine to introduce themselves. Carrie, you want to go ahead? Oh, you're on mute, Carrie.
Mute. Yep. I'm on mute. Great. So thank you, Brad. So yes, I'm Carrie Suleiman. I've been with WWF Canada. Role is to oversee the marketing and fundraising for events, plus one-time gifts, monthly, those kinds of programs. And the peer-to-peer program is a big part of that. So Catherine, I don't know if you want to quickly jump in and introduce yourself and give a little bit of background, and then I'll walk through the event background itself.
Sure, great. Thanks, Carrie. My name is Catherine Magic, and happy to be here today. I'm the Director of Corporate Partnerships at WWF Canada, so I lead all of our work with companies and partnerships, including sponsorship and sponsorship of the climb that we're talking about today.
Great, thank you. So I'm going to go and do a little bit of a screen share with you right now. Hopefully, there we go. I had this really great idea that I was going to share some videos with you, but if you just check out our social site, I think on Instagram, those videos are there. I don't want to try to do it on Zoom right now. So if I can, there we go. So a little bit about the background of our event. So the CN Tower Climb for Nature is the single largest fundraising event for WWF Canada. It takes place in the spring every year, and we do our planning pretty much all year, with the heavy lifting happening from January until March, April. But we really start formulating our plans starting in September, August and September, so that we can roll out starting in January. Each year we have about 7,000 people register for the event, and the event and its execution, we require about 500 volunteers to make it happen. So those volunteers are stationed in our kind of staging area, registration area at Toronto Metropolitan Convention Center, as well as the CN Tower itself. One thing that's really interesting about our event is that the entire staff located in Toronto participates and volunteers in the event. So there's a lot of organizational buy-in and belief in the event, which is really exciting. And 2020 marked the 30th anniversary of our event. So this has been a long time annual event for the organization. We have all of the details buttoned down for this event after 30 years. There's very little that's going to come up and surprise us, except maybe a pandemic. And because the event has been around for such a long time, we have a really high rating with our participants, and 94% of our participants said that they would recommend this event to their friends and families and colleagues. So we feel like we were in a really good situation going into our 30th anniversary year. So if you aren't familiar with the CN Tower climb, it's actually what it sounds like. You're not climbing up the outside of the CN Tower, you're actually climbing up an inside stairwell of the CN Tower. So that's what this picture represents. There are 1,776 steps inside the CN Tower that people have to go up, and if that represents about 144 flights of stairs for people. So as you can imagine, people are training, they're really excited to not only take on this physical challenge that they've put up for themselves, but also really support the mission and the work of WWF Canada. So as we all know, in the spring, things were a little unclear, unsettled, and we were monitoring the situation, but you know, it was kind of on the sidelines in January and February. come March, though, we really started to take a pretty serious look at what was happening. We were in conversations with our partners, the Convention Center and the CN Tower. But even then, the CN Tower was saying, you know what, we stayed open during the SARS pandemic that happened in Toronto. You know, our own event, the CN Tower climb that happened during that spring, went on as scheduled. So even in March, we were a little bit unsure of which direction things would go in. So that's kind of important for us to just keep in mind. Just like everybody else, we were like, oh, maybe it's really bad, maybe it's not, we don't know. But we did decide it was important to start doing some scenario planning. So we had a scenario plan A, a plan B, and a plan C. And basically those plans were, plan A was the event was going to go on as scheduled, but we may have to put in some minor adjustments. That quickly and obviously went out the window pretty fast. Plan B was we would reschedule the event. As we progressed, it became pretty clear that rescheduling that event within the window that allowed for a climb in the tower, which obviously gets pretty hot during the summer months, probably wasn't going to work for us either. And then plan C was we needed to change the event. And we decided not to cancel the event, but pivot the event into a virtual climb. And that decision happened pretty quickly once the provincial and the federal government pretty much put everything in a state of lockdown. So we were in a position where we had a plan and we were ready to go with a virtual climb. We didn't really know what a virtual climb would look like, but we were starting to make those plans, I would say the week of that final Friday the 13th, and on March 13th, we were in a place where we could actually pivot the event and launch something brand new. So we did. Let's see, we're gonna go to the next slide maybe. And we pivoted towards the CN Tower virtual climb. So we changed up our artwork. We put together plans for the new event, and we had a decision whether we would want to charge forward and continue to market our event, or kind of just let it just do what it was going to do. And we made the decision, you know what, let's just go for it. Let's continue to advertise, continue to let people know that the virtual climb was happening, and then figure out how we were going to actually offer that up. So we were really in a very fortunate position, because when we announced that we were going on our virtual climb, we had participants who had already registered reach out to us and say, hey, that's really great, here's what I did. So while we were working towards April 4th and 5th for the event, we did have climbers already come to us and say, hey, you know what, now that it's virtual, I went ahead and climbed the condo steps that I had been training, and I completed my time in 30 minutes, and I did all 1,776 steps. So we were able to take that information that our registered participants were already doing and kind of send that out on social and normalize the situation to make people feel like, hey, I can do this too. These people are already coming up with their own virtual climbs. I can do this too. So we shared a lot of stories pre-event going into April 4th and 5th. And then once April 4th and 5th rolled around, we were blown away by some of the creative ways that our participants decided to create their own virtual climb, because we left it up to our registered participants to achieve the climb however they wanted to. So I thought it'd be really fun to just share a few highlights. So the first person on the left, she decided she was going to go out onto her patio in her condo building and take a step stool and go up and down that single step 1,776 times. So you can see that she felt quite confident when she did it with the support of her family there, which was pretty incredible. Another person, this one actually was a WWF staffer, he decided he was going to hit his ping pong ball 144 times to represent the 144 flights of stairs. And our own CEO, Megan Leslie decided that she was going to skip rope 1,706 times, 76 times in her backyard. So a lot of creativity went into how people were going to take this challenge and make it their own. We had great social media pickup on April 4th and 5th. Couple of highlights here, that our best post was this kind of pandagram of how to do social distancing that was really popular. Another one that we had up was Merlin the cat, who, go check him out on Instagram. Merlin the cat did the climb as well.
Can I call you back? Thank you.
Oh, sorry, someone still has they need to put their mute on if you don't mind. Thank you. So lots of great interaction that we had during the climb. And then the final one I want to show everyone, because it's Ryan Reynolds, who is one of our favorite Canadians. One of our participants decided that he was going to climb the steps near the world's highest hydraulic lift lock in Peterborough, I believe, for his portion of the climb, and he did it dressed as Deadpool. And then, of course, he tagged Ryan Reynolds, and Ryan Reynolds then responded. So we were able to really maximize Ryan Reynolds' following as part of the CN Tower Climb for Nature. So that was really fun for us. The one thing I want to share that was really interesting also for us to deal with was during the same time that all of this activity was happening, almost immediately afterwards, this post happened. The provincial government of Ontario sent out an emergency alert telling everyone to basically stay home. So all of those people that were planning and doing activity out in nature, we had to quickly encourage people to do things in their home on the weekend of the climb. So there was a lot of activity that just happened on the fly, and it was quite exciting, but also kind of nerve-wracking because you didn't know what was actually going to happen next. So the one thing we did put together from an organizational standpoint was some virtual climb classes. And we did this because people aren't necessarily going to go off and be creative and come up with ping pong challenges for themselves or skipping rope on themselves. We wanted to make sure that we could mimic the climb experience as much as we could for our participants. So we partnered with a fitness training group called the Junction Fitness. And these trainers had also done the climb in the past, so they were very familiar with our organization. They had done the climb themselves. They were disappointed, just like the rest of us, that we weren't going to be able to do the climb, but they came on board and they were really great partners because they're also offering virtual climb classes. And what they did for us is they put together a workout that was incredibly challenging because climbing the CN Tower is challenging. So they wanted to make sure that what they were offering to our participants was going to be a physical challenge so that people felt like they really accomplished something at the end of it. And then the other thing they did to really tie it back to WWF is they turned the class workout into really species-specific activity. So you'll see this guy over here, he's practicing some panda punches, right? And I think this was a frog hop that happened. So they started to name the exercises after species and animals just to kind of bring it back to the WWF mission. And then just from a logistics standpoint, we obviously offer pricing as part of our peer-to-peer activity. So we quickly changed up our t-shirts and some of the pricing to help reflect the nature of the virtual climb that we did. We typically charge at registration a $5 chip fee to cover the cost of any lost timing chips as part of the activity. We diverted that fee, obviously, because we weren't using chips, into shipping out the pricing for our participants, and we're using a fulfillment house to do that so that we're not incurring volunteers coming into the office and obviously exposing people to situations they wouldn't be safe in. And then finally, I wanted to offer up a couple of virtual event tips that we learned. I mean, some of this now seems pretty obvious, 40 days into our self-isolation, but for the virtual classes, we used a tool called Acuity, which was really helpful for us because it allowed participants to RSVP. It would also send out reminders, reminding people which class they signed up for. And it also gave us the opportunity to embed updated waivers for the event. I think that's really important piece for those of you who actually are responsible for events, is that you should probably make sure that legal looks at whatever waivers you have to make sure that they're reflective of the new virtual event that you're hosting. I think we all know this at this point, but as moderators, you can turn off your chat facility. You should mute everybody when they come into a classroom. We had a couple of kids who were doing the classes with their parents that unmuted all the time, so we were making sure that we were constantly monitoring the situation, because while it was really cute, it was also a little bit distracting. Make sure you have a show run, even though it's a virtual event. Make sure that you understand who's doing what when, and make sure you are able to communicate with your team members. I think that was, we were so used to being on walkie-talkies for our actual event. When it came time to hosting a virtual event 3 weeks later, we suddenly forgot how to communicate with each other if it wasn't on a computer. So just making sure you have that mechanism in place when you go into your event is a good tip to have. And then Catherine, you want to talk about our sponsors?
Yes. Can you hear me okay? Yeah. Great. Thanks, Carrie. So we have, for the CN Tower Climb, there's really 2 ways that corporate partners, I guess, are involved. We do have a few sponsors in IKEA and Nissan, and also a big part of the participants is corporate teams. About 1/3 of the participants are part of corporate teams. So it's a really big employee engagement event for us. So I'll talk a little bit about the sponsors. So as Carrie mentioned, things happened really quickly. The event was really soon after everything shut down. So, we made it a priority to update our sponsors, obviously, as soon as we made the decision to switch to a virtual event. We were quickly trying to, as we pivoted the event and coming up with all the new signage and social media and advertising, looking at ways to engage the sponsors and give them benefits to make up for the benefits that they wouldn't get by being on site at the event. So we had some ideas and some brainstorm sessions, but what we found was, because it was so early, and literally I think 2 to 3 weeks after everything shut down was when the event was taking place, our partners were in their own crisis planning. So we came up with some ideas and talked about them, but at the end of the day, they were coming back to us to say, look, we don't even know what's going on with our employees right now or in our stores, and we just can't deal with this right now. So kind of good for us to think about different ways to give them different benefits and pivot, but really they were coming back saying, we just can't participate right now. So the team really kind of said, do what you can, and then we'll look at some ways to do some things after the fact once things have settled in and the initial crisis planning was taken care of. So so it was kind of tough to really deliver on the benefits, but the great thing is both partners were our bigger partners of WWF and understood, and they decided to continue to support the event regardless. So the other piece was, as I mentioned, the employee groups, and we found the same thing on their end. Some employee groups still decided to rally and do some engagement around it, but a lot of them also had to step back and dial back their engagement of employees, again, because they were figuring out what was going on in their own business and companies. So some of them were saying that they'd like to come back and do a climb, a virtual climb or a class or something like that with their employees at a later date. That's kind of the main pieces for that.
Great. So I don't know if we want to open it up to questions at this point. I see a bit in the chat. That was our formal presentation, Brad.
No, that's awesome. Thanks so much for the summary, and definitely, you were unwilling pioneers in making this happen, in the shift to a virtual event. There's definitely quite a number of questions, and I'm glad to see people are so engaged with it. I guess one of the first ones, we were just touching on it, was just about the brainstorming with your partners. So you were talking about doing some different timing and different styles of events, but did you have much chance, Catherine, to get down that road, or was it really just quickly pivoting?
Yeah, I mean, we did, especially with IKEA, we were looking at some ideas. Carrie mentioned the virtual classes. We were thinking initially, could we maybe host some of those in an IKEA store, for example, and showcase IKEA coworkers doing something in the store. But it quickly, because at that time things were basically not even changing day by day, they were changing by the hour. The ideas were great and people liked them, but we just couldn't, both sides were hesitant to commit to anything because we really weren't sure what even the next day was going to look like. So the ideas were flowing, but it was just too much uncertainty to make any concrete plans.
And did you have much conversation about ROI and valuing the benefits that they were initially intending to receive and what you were able to provide?
Mm-hmm. It was certainly something we were looking at as a team internally and wanting to make sure that we did still deliver ROI. To be honest, the partners were great in saying, of course, we're going to still make the sponsorship payment, and it wasn't top of mind for them. So it really wasn't something that they were demanding of us at the time, again, because they had a lot on their own plates, and we're looking at what a few things that we can do to make up for the fact afterwards, because we weren't able to capitalize on some of those ideas for the weekend of. But something that was top of mind for our team and wanting to make sure we still did deliver benefits, but at the time the sponsors weren't overly demanding on that piece.
And I guess just based on the timing of the event, had you even bothered to look at representing the sponsorship opportunities, or were you just taking what you already had in the queue and working with them to modify it?
In terms of the benefits that were outlined for them?
There were a couple questions in the chat just about did you actually develop a new sponsorship package, and I think timing-wise, it might have been a challenge for you to even take that to market.
Mm-hmm. So no, we didn't have time to develop a whole new sponsorship package. We were more focused on communicating with our existing partners and making sure that they were involved in the discussions up to date, and we were executing whatever we could and that they would want to execute in the new reality, basically.
And you're really dependent on sponsors as a big portion of your revenue, but also it's the corporate teams that I think do represent a big portion of your revenue. So how was the engagement with them? And I think they probably going through a lot of challenges themselves, of uncertainty about their own jobs and how they're working with their employees. So how did that play out?
Yeah, I think what we saw was there were a few teams that were still very, very gung-ho and did kind of similar to what Carrie was showing, some creative ways to still do employee engagement and raise some money, and some of them had targets that they had set, and including matching programs from the company. And then others were pretty honest with us and really just said, look, there's so much going on right now, we're not able to do this at this time. There were a few that we were looking at potentially doing a virtual fitness class at a later date to still engage them. So something we had to also look at internally, how much of that could we support, and how much later after the fact could we support those things. So those were all conversations that we were having at the time.
There's quite a few questions as well, just about revenue raised, and did you lose a lot just in fallout from people not participating. I think probably timing wise and being on an online platform, you probably did fairly well based on my outsider's view, and I'm not sure whether you're open to having that conversation, but there's definitely a few interested individuals.
Yeah, I mean, I can try to address it as much as I can. I mean, for us, what typically happens in the 3 weeks leading up to the event is we have this great hockey stick that happens, right? It kind of chugs along, and then the 3 weeks, the revenue really spikes right at the end. So for us, unfortunately, those 3 weeks right before the event was a time of complete chaos in the marketplace, right? If you think back to mid-March, people were struggling to figure out how to get home from international destinations. Our premier was telling us to go on vacation, then our prime minister was telling us to come home. Like, it was just madness, right? So we were not necessarily on top of people's minds, right? And I think because the pivot for us happened right in that critical time, it was a real journey for people to go along with us on it, right? Because I think their initial reaction was, well, why are you doing this? Why aren't you doing the climb, or why aren't you postponing it, right? And they didn't really have all those answers. I think today it's obvious and clear why we did what we did, but I think when you're in that moment, it was really hard for people to kind of go on that journey with us because it was just so new to everybody. So, I mean, unfortunately, we didn't hit our revenue target that we had set a year ago for the event. I mean, it's not really surprising given what was going on. But, I'm really proud of what we were able to accomplish on the event. So we didn't lose money on the event. I think if we were going off and doing it now, it would be different, right? If we were doing it from 0 to 100 right today, it would be a different kind of event than having to pivot right in the middle of it.
Patricia's got a question just about, and I'm going to sort of summarize it and reframe it, but you're a national organization running a Toronto-based event. So pivoting to virtual, did you actually see growth beyond the Toronto Centre for participants?
Yeah, that's a great question. We had about 100 people outside of the GTA sign up for it, which is kind of interesting because up until that point, we had only been marketing in the GTA. So we had about a week's worth of virtual advertising that went national. So that was really an interesting experiment for us. We had always talked about maybe we should do a virtual climb and how do we make that happen. So now we have evidence that there is actually an interest in doing that. So I'm sure we'll be talking seriously about that moving forward. So that was kind of a win, I would say, for us, is that we got to try that out without having to risk anything.
So in terms of that, did you actually end up investing in social to promote the fact that you've changed the event, or did you do any additional promotion that way?
We did invest a little bit more in social, and we did expand the reach, but again, there was just not enough time in between when the decision was made and when the actual event happened. That was about 2 weeks. So we were working with the hand that we were dealt with at that point.
Gilbert is asking whether or not you were able to engage with your sponsors, and I think Catherine touched a little bit on that they were a little overwhelmed themselves. But is there opportunity to lean on their databases in order to share out the activity, and whether you're doing that as an ongoing activity with your sponsors, anyways?
Yeah, we were hoping to, and it was part of the discussions especially with IKEA, both internally for their employees and whether they obviously have a huge database and connection with a lot of Canadians. I think if it was happening now and we had longer lead time and people were more used to the new normal, as we're calling it, we would have been able to do that. but at the time they just said they didn't have the capacity, and their all of their resources were really tied up in figuring out whether they were closing stores and what everything meant for them internally as an organization. So unfortunately, we weren't able to capitalize on this, but it was something we did talk about, and in the future, definitely would be part of the conversation.
And there's a few sort of logistics questions, Carrie, just talking about reg fee and your donation minimums. Did that change through the process? You talked about refunding the chip deposit, but were there other logistical changes you need to make in the system?
Yeah, I mean, because we had to pivot right in the middle, we made the decision not to actually lower the participation fee, because it's not really fair to the people who had already done the fundraising and hit their targets to begin with. So we kept everything exactly the same. We didn't, the registration fee, the timing chip fee, we just switched it from a timing chip fee, replacement fee, to a shipping fee. So everything was exactly the same, whether you were doing the physical climb or the virtual climb, because again, we weren't building from a ground zero to 100. We were already kind of 75% the way there.
And then the waiver fee that you pivoted to, is that available on your platform for people to review?
The participation waiver, the participation waiver, that's a great question. I think it is still on the platform, but again, I would highly encourage folks to make sure that their own legal team looks at it, because what worked for us and what covered for us is not maybe going to be applicable to your own event, because I'm not sure how many other people are doing a tower climb.
And what platform do you guys use for your peer-to-peer?
That is TeamRaiser through Blackbaud.
Okay, and it's pretty flexible to make those changes through all of this?
It's flexible as any other platform. I mean, we were fortunate, our programmers and the team really worked very hard. I mean, they worked on the weekend. They made it all magically happen, but it wasn't magic. There's a lot of hard work behind the scenes.
And you've got a significant volunteer team that you need on site. Were you able to redeploy them or keep them engaged in some fashion?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we kind of went the same journey with our volunteer group that we went with our corporate partners and our own planning. We first had meetings about, okay, we can redeploy them to do something else. Oh, they actually can't gather in groups now. Oh, they can't come into the office. Oh, right? So it just kind of whittled down from what we could actually use them for to there really isn't anything we could offer them. We toyed with the idea of giving, because a lot of our volunteers were also high school students who were doing it for credit. If they retweeted our information, could we give them credit? But that didn't really seem to make any sense. So at the end of the day, we just had to say thank you, and we'll reach out to you next year.
So if you were sitting at 4 months out instead of 3 weeks out, have you thought about how you would approach the change differently? I know there's a few people on the call who've got September, October events and are just sort of in the same position, trying to figure out, can it actually move forward?
Yeah, that's a great, I honestly, I was just so relieved that it was over. I thought about what we would do if we had to do it as a virtual event again. I mean, I think we probably would have offered more classes, more opportunities for people. You would have a longer runway to market what you were offering. And I think there's a longer runway to actually work with your partners as well to come up with something that's going to make sense for your sponsors, what's going to make sense for your participants. You can survey your participants now and say, hey, we're planning to do these 3 things, which is of the most interest to you. I mean, we just had no opportunity to explore anything. We just had to put a pin in it and just run with it.
And then from your logistics partners in terms of costs for the event production and for utilizing the MTCC and the CN Tower, I'm not sure whether that's provided in kind or not, but did you find that you had pretty good savings in terms of your hard costs?
Because we've been doing the event for 30 years, and if a vendor is good, we have a relationship with them, so we were able to do a lot of negotiating with them. I mean, obviously there were some sunk costs that we couldn't recover, but the internal team did a great job of working with our vendors to recover as much as we could.
Just again, I'm going to pick on somebody I know is on the call with John or Bob from Parkinson's. I know you're heavily in planning for the walk coming up in September. What are your thoughts, and where are you positioned moving forward?
It's a good thing I was seated in front of the camera and ready to turn on, Brad. Thanks for the opportunity. I flagged something in the chat, and it's just worth highlighting that in our early stages, we're finding the same issues working with our partners that you mentioned, in that while my business crisis is planning for Parkinson's Superwalk in September, Burn Bay Farms, who is a great partner for us, their business crisis is supply and demand of eggs. So we've just had that kind of, we have a great idea and they're not ready to capitalize, and hopefully the benefit of time allows us both to stabilize and strategize together. For our event as a whole, we actually just came off a call with our volunteer team where we've made a decision to not host public events in September across the country at this stage. And I know that, you mentioned others on the call, Brad, trying to make that decision. Not all of our volunteers were consulted along the way, of course, but not all of them were thrilled to hear it. But generally, everyone understood, and it was just important for us to have a plan, right? So we, as much as we wanted to wait to make that decision, or to allow public health context to dictate which walks we could have and which we couldn't with an 80-site event, we made the call. So it was really interesting seeing what some of you shared in terms of the virtual classes and virtual engagement opportunities, particularly those like tied to the cause, which I think is great. And that's kind of where our thinking is as well. Your challenge was 3 weeks, get ready to go. Our challenge is 5 months, hold people's interest. And, they're unique in their challenge. So short summary, and appreciate the opportunity to share. We're focusing on small campaigns. So we have an exercise initiative that is cause focused for people with Parkinson's, but adaptable for those who love them. In May, that's exercise focused. And we have a June initiative and a July challenge, kind of walking people towards the ultimate goal of cumulative exercise and a walk virtually together in September. And yeah, that's the shortest summary of our game plan. Is basically 4 campaigns culminating in the big campaign, and trying to keep people engaged throughout the way. The next barrier for us is all of our offline folks. We work with an older population as our supporter base, and rural communities and all that stuff. So the next challenge is, how do we engage all those people in a way that has meaning for them, that's cause relevant and all that stuff. But that's the summary of the plan, and glad to share it.
Well, I think you've got the experience from last year with the tornado or hurricane hitting into Halifax, with having a couple sites closed down and having to be on site and collect money in some fashion. So there's some learning, but I guess it's still a challenge. I think it's one of those interesting things, looking at what you did with Junction Fitness and bringing that partner on board, Catherine, and getting them engaged, and looking at what's going on with some of the professional sports teams and how they're trying to engage their partners, and bringing on the athletes and having a sponsored event virtually with the athlete, doing some sort of engagement with youth, or keeping people exercising in that. Is there opportunity for you to bring on different partners, or to further engage your existing partners in those kinds of activities? I don't know whether, Catherine, you've got a thought on that, or John, or anyone else on the call.
Yeah, I have to give the credit to Carrie and her team for the Junction Fitness partnership. That was their relationship. They've helped us in the past too, but yeah, it's definitely, I think, as you think about online and virtual, we've started to talk about it for other events that may have to be virtual now. What do you do that's engaging, that's different, and who do you partner with, whether it's technology companies or something related to fitness, depending on what your property or organization is. I don't know, Carrie, if you have anything to add there in terms of that partnership.
I think as you were just mentioning those athletes, and my head was already thinking about, oh my God, that'd be great. Maybe Raptor could join our virtual class next year. Because anyway, my mind was already spinning in a different direction there. But I think the other thing we should also mention is Melissa Grillo, who is from the social, happens to be on our board. So she also had a team together that then she turned into a virtual team as well. And then she ended up hosting and kind of doing the intros for our virtual classes. So just being able to pull in folks and pull all your relationships in and figure out the best way to deploy them, I think is a great opportunity, because it's new for everybody. So everyone they're your partners, they work with you, they want to help you, and you just have to ask.
And have you given thought to the logistics for 2021? Knowing that this may carry on for a while and you'd have to modify your event, or are you just still in the glow of having this done and not started to think about the modifications for next year?
I think we're probably a bit in the glow, and I think the other challenge is that things are changing so rapidly, right? Like if we're talking about easing back into our new normal for January, let's say, what does that look like, right? So I think the scenario planning is going to start again. It's a little bit too soon, I think, to start doing that, but I think the team will start to, scenario A is we can only send 100 people up at a time. Scenario B is, right? So I think we'll start putting those scenarios together.
And then one of the questions was related to the fact that you did have the success outside of the GTA in terms of participants. Even if you were to run the 31st annual as you always have, would you do a virtual component just to take advantage of that growth?
Why not? It's just sitting there waiting for you. So yeah, of course, we'll be looking very closely at that.
And then Leanne was asking, do you do all your social internally, or do you utilize any outside organizations for delivering that?
We work with a digital agency to help us do the media placement for that. And a lot of our advertising is done in kind for the CN Tower. So the more traditional media, you're out of home and things like that. So our partners were really great in working with us to flip things out and make the changes really quickly.
So just thinking about, this is sort of the summary of what you went through. What would you identify as kind of a couple of the big challenges and a couple of things that surprised you?
Well, I think the big challenges obviously was that nothing was set in stone and everything just changed from hour to hour. So being incredibly flexible was really important for our organization. Making sure the leadership of the organization was engaged and attuned and aware of what was happening and how quickly things were happening, I think was really important, because it might have been my event, but it's the organization's event. And just keeping our CEO and our CFO apprised of what was happening constantly was beneficial for the organization as a whole. Catherine, do you have anything about learnings differently?
Yeah, I'm thinking about it. I think, definitely challenging in terms of, I think at some point we just realized definitely important to keep our sponsors and partners up to speed on what was going on and offer them things, but because of the freshness of it, coming to a realization that, it just wasn't the right time to pester them too much, and they had their own issues that they needed to deal with in the immediate future. So I think having a longer lead time, or having to pivot for other events, there's more opportunities to engage them and look at what sponsor benefits you could pivot to, given a different reality.
And does it change the type of sponsors you'd look at bringing on board?
It could. I mean, certainly for in-kind sponsors, technology companies, which I'm sure they're getting lots of proposals these days, and lots of requests, but it could, depending on what the offering is, and what kind of audiences you're reaching instead, and how to engage in what the audiences of the partners are respectively. So for sure, warrants taking a deeper look at.
I don't know if you've had a chance to look through the chat. I'll send it to you afterward. There's a couple of good ideas people are sharing with you on things you could do to expand the event. Victoria is throwing out that you should be engaging with gyms and creating virtual events in gyms across the country, utilizing their stair climbers. So, additional elements for you.
Cool.
A great idea.
Good life sponsorship.
Yeah, good life, Orange Theory. There's some good ones that are eager out there.
Yeah.
Great. Well, thank you so much for your insight. I mean, it's definitely, you sort of been thrown into the focus of being the pioneers of dealing with the changes, and really exciting to see you had success. It wasn't necessarily the success you may have wanted at the beginning, but you were able to definitely turn, get lemonade out of lemons, which was awesome. And your partners stood behind you, and your participants were still, as dedicated to the cause to create those different elements and showcase that, which probably gave you some new viral elements. I think did you find you got much engagement on social beyond what you would normally have gotten?
The social pickup was really great for us. I think at that particular moment, the other thing that was happening is that there was such bad news coming out all the time. Like, this is canceled, now this is canceled, now this is closed, right? Like, it was just a constant barrage until we got to the everything's on hold moment. So this kind of, it's different, was a really refreshing message to be out there. So I know our communications team had some pretty good success in getting some media pickup and setting our CEO up for interviews, and just trying to get a little bit of good news out there during a time when everything was just kind of coming in and closing.
Awesome. Well, it's fantastic to have you on. Thank you for participating today. Thank you, Catherine, and everybody for joining in. It's great to see so many people getting value out of these sessions, and being able to have a chance to bring everybody together on these different conversations.